SSTUWA members are strongly encouraged to register for the range of industrial and professional courses available face-to-face or online. Find these courses online via sstuwa.org.au/training.
Hello and welcome to Western Teacher Live, the podcast of the State School Teachers Union of Western Australia. And a special thank you for listening to us during your term break. But this is such an important issue, we thought we'd intrude on whatever downtime you are managing. And joining me to do that is the SSTUWA President Matt Jarman. And we are talking as pre-poll voting gets underway here in Western Australia for the federal election. That starts that pre-poll on the 22nd of April and runs right up until the day before the actual polling day, which is the 3rd of May, of course. So, Matt, is this the most important federal election education-wise, perhaps in our lifetime? And if so, why?
G'day, Bob. I think so. I think the simple answer is yes. We have rarely had such a clear distinction between both of the major political parties on public education. Through the Australian Education Union and through our own local efforts here in WA, we've managed to get education higher on the political agenda, higher on the political decision making, and we saw evidence of that in the recent WA state election. And this federal election means that we can finally achieve our very long-term goals and perhaps not have to fight for another term of funding for full funding of our schools. Quite simply, one of our major parties supports full funding for public schools, the other doesn't. It wants to dismantle the Federal Department of Education in a very Trump-like way. And one party wants to extend fee-free TAFE and with it consolidate TAFE's position really as this country's most prominent workforce development entity. So the other party, they've clearly stated that they want to scrap it.
And the SSTUWA is a non-aligned union that does not donate any of its members' fees to any political party. Is it now telling its members how to vote?
No, not at all. The reason for this podcast is simply now, in about week 3 or 4 of the election campaign, we now have clear evidence as to what both major political parties, and the Greens for that matter, are suggesting as their agenda going forward into the vote. We have a very broad range of members. They have a very wide spectrum of views. We have always been respectful of that. However, one of the key reasons for our existence, and it says this on our website, is that the State School Teachers Union of WA promotes the value of public education to the community as a whole. And we would simply be derelict, in my view, if we did not take upon that duty during this election campaign and make sure that our members have all of the information and stop to consider how vital the vote will be for public education, including TAFE, at this upcoming election.
Now, members will face a wide range of options when they're voting. They're obviously the two main parties, one of whom is likely to form government either in a minority government or in a majority, which is obviously Labor and the Coalition. We've then got the Greens and a range of independents, and certainly with the Greens, for example, if they were ever elected in their own right, then the education situation would be very bright for everybody because their commitments pretty much would be a wish list from the AU and the SSTUWA. But given the electoral system we have, and it would like to have one of the two major parties, either Labor or the Coalition, forming government in one or another, what are the key differences in their approaches to public education? Why don't we start with TAFE?
Yeah, I think so. TAFE has been a very clearly defined position from the opposition for months now. They have, through several spokespeople, spoken about the fact that they will defund TAFE, that they will abolish the fee-free TAFE initiative. And that is a significant concern. There are currently 600,000 Australians who are enrolled in fee-free TAFE. These are courses that are designed to aim at the construction industry, which obviously links back to the housing sector crisis. It also goes to the manufacturing industry. And we know from Job Skills Australia, and this is where I don't quite understand the opposition's position, we know from Job Skills Australia that if you complete a TAFE qualification, you'll on average increase your income by about $12,000 per year as a starting position. It'll only grow from there. And we also know from other sources that low and middle income earners spend around about 80% of their income in the local community. So from an economic development, from an industry perspective, from the perspective of people having a greater opportunity to achieve their life goals, I simply don't understand what the opposition position is, and I don't understand the explanation or evidence that they have as to why they would defund TAFE. TAFE has been absolutely decimated in the last 10 years prior to the most recent government, and we can't afford to go back to that position.
And that decimation was ended with after a campaign by the SSTUWA here in Western Australia, the TAFE Works campaign. And it was one of the things that really sort of almost established the policy of the incoming Labor state government back in the day, where they did invest in TAFE. They did recognise TAFE as the core provider of training, and we ended up with a far healthier system here, whilst far from perfect, but a far healthier system than in the east, where it was just, in particularly places like New South Wales, the campuses were sold off. The buildings don't even exist anymore, or they're owned by private vendors. So this is something that SSTUWA members actively campaign for here in Western Australia.
Yeah, our TAFE lecturers are incredibly critical people to the workforce, as are our TAFE campuses. And you're right, across the country we saw TAFE campuses closing. We saw some of them just becoming simply desktops for students to sit in front of with no access to practical support or high-quality expert support. We also saw courses collapse and close. We saw students from some states travel to other states to take up apprenticeships because they couldn't do that in their home state, which increased all of the family-related costs. Of course, we also saw job losses. We saw escalating debt for some of our students. So we simply can't, we may very well have not experienced the full extent of that here in WA, but we certainly went through a period that we don't want to return to, and we certainly don't want to return to that period across the entire country now that following the Minister Brendan O'Connor's magnificent investment in TAFE initiative in the last term of government, we simply do not want to go back to what it was like, and we should not forget what it did look like. When you've got young people having to leave their home state to go and do an apprenticeship in their chosen field in another state, you know that you're not doing your job locally.
And when we move on to schools, there was some sort of flip-flopping around this, but then there's been some very clear, particularly in the recent campaign launch, of the position of the Liberal Party and the Coalition on school funding, and it was not the response that we wanted.
No, it's taken a little while during the course of the election campaign for the opposition to come clean, but they finally have around school funding. But I don't think that's the only risk that we've seen through the election campaign that's presented by the Dutton-led opposition. Most concerningly is this coercive behaviour, and I think that's the only way that I can best describe it, that it intends to apply should it become leading our country. You simply can never have a political leader of any flavour dictating what the curriculum will be and how it is taught, and that is exactly what Dutton and many other members of the opposition have been saying through this very poorly explained position of indoctrination. The indoctrination statements are in effect nothing more than an insult to all of our professional teachers. But obviously they have some form of an agenda. It's a very Trump-like sounding, I have to say, sounding agenda, where they wish to influence what's taught and how it is taught. So when you couple that with the underfunding of our public schools, or the defunding, if that's what their intention actually is, of what we've managed to achieve through the state and federal government agreements, then there is a great significant difference between what the two parties are offering. It's taken us more than a decade, an entire generation of students, and a lot of very, very good teachers and school leaders have since left our system because of how poorly resourced it's been. And we are now at in my view, that we are at the 99 metre mark at 100 metres to get to full funding across this entire country, and that is absolutely at risk if we see a Dutton-led government.
And what is the message around the funding from the Labor point of view? Because we do have issues still with that about timing and about the span of when the funding will come in. But the new agreement, in principle at least, between the federal government and state governments does bring it back to at least 100% funding for public schools. So we'd still be lobbying a re-elected Labor government to speed things up. But presumably if Labor don't get back, there won't be anything to speed up.
Well, what we're working towards now is that WA public school students will enjoy up to 96% of the school's resourcing funding formula by the end of next year, and the period after that, the return of the other 4%, which at the moment is worth about $220 million per annum coming back towards our public school students and staff. So we have not had final discussion around when that's going to happen and what that would look like, but all of that will be lost if we have a Dutton-led opposition. We will return back, most likely and highly likely, to 91% of the SRS, which is what WA floundered around on for the best part of that decade. So we might think of these as small percentage numbers, but we're actually talking of hundreds of millions of dollars, and over the course of a decade, more than $1 billion that has not flowed into public schools, and quite inequitably has flowed to private schools, because there's not a private school here, as I've said many times on these podcasts. Here in WA, that is less than 100% of the state and federal government agreement. We are not asking and have never asked for money to be taken from private school funding. That is an entirely different pool of funds. All we have asked for is equity. We've asked for the same. And with the Albanese government, we are working towards achieving that. But it's clear now from statements that Peter Dutton has made that we will be underfunded in the public school system, which is a logic I simply cannot accept and I simply don't understand.
So the message to our members, basically they're TAFE members or school members, is look at all of the facts. Do, as they say in the classics, do your own research, but have a look at the clearly stated policies of the different parties and consider the impact on public education when you cast your vote, and then obviously your choice who you vote for.
Yeah, that's right. And we have to also keep in mind the important and prominent role that public education and schools play. We have the highest proportion of Aboriginal students in our schools. We have the highest proportion of students who have complex needs in our schools. We know that Peter Dutton has laughed at the plight of immigrants in his former roles. We know that he didn't stand for marriage equality and didn't vote for the voice. Our public schools are critical to the fabric of this nation, and they need to be fully funded. We can't risk an opposition that's going to come to government that's going to do damage to all of that equity, as well as the underfunding of our schools.
And as we mentioned, moving on, that's the message for members. When you're considering how to vote, then you make your own decision. But while we're talking about these sorts of issues, pre-poll opens on the 22nd of April. Coincidentally, the 23rd of April will mark the first anniversary of the amazing rallies that we saw in the metro area and country regions. The Matagarup Bridge was full of over 10,000 people, what was described as the biggest union rally seen in Perth for over a decade, in Western Australia for over a decade. How do you feel a year on?
It doesn't feel like it's been a year. Look, I think I look back on the 23rd of April last year as simply one of the proudest moments that I've been involved with. Most certainly, it doesn't really matter what your role is within the SSTU. We were all there together. I think my main reflections would be the fact that we had those 20, as you alluded to, country locations, and they were all saying the same thing. It was all about workload. It was all about conditions. It was all about safety. And also the fact that when I looked back over my shoulder, having crossed into Gloucester Park, I could still see people joining the march. And the police officers at the front of that march said to us that they felt there was about 12,000 people in that march and that it was now about 1 kilometre long. And I think that is an overwhelming and should not be ignored demonstration that when teachers and their supporters come out, their voice will be heard. It is significantly powerful. And that is what I would suggest to any government going into the federal election or any political party. I certainly think that the state Labor Party here listened to that voice, and we saw a lot of very significant education-related commitments made by the Cook government. I would be taking a leaf out of that book if I were a political party on the federal space and not ignoring the teacher voice.
Well, we certainly never ignore the teacher voice, and indeed try to amplify it wherever possible. So if you are thinking back with happy memories of that great rally, you can relive it on our website at sstuwa.org.au. You can watch the video of the Metropolitan March, which takes about 3 minutes and is really, really well done. And of course, see a lot of images from all of those different regions where people also came out and voted with their feet for public education. So we are very, very lucky in this country. You walk up, we cast a ballot. There might be the occasional glare across the political spectrum, but very rarely anything more than that. We don't have to go and get our hands marked in purple or fight wars for the right to vote. So go out, make sure you vote your own way, and we hope that this podcast has helped you make your mind up about which way to do that. So thank you once again for joining us, particularly during your break, when we're always encouraging you to disconnect, except when we're bringing you a really important podcast like this. So thank you, Matt, and thank you to all of the listeners.
Are you aware of your SSTUWA member benefits? We've got you covered on a range of member benefits, from entertainment to insurance and legal. Check out our benefits hub via sstuwa.org.au/benefits.